Welcome to Green and Gold Forever. I'm Eric Drews, broadcasting from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and we'll be joined shortly here by Matt McLean out in Eau Claire. And what a difference a week makes. The Green Bay Packers return to Lambeau Field for their home opener after a real tough loss to the San Francisco 49ers, and they obliterate the Washington Redskins by a final score of 38-20, and it was not even that close. Obviously, a lot of good things to talk about coming out of this game, and we can make an assessment as to whether or not this changes our opinion on the Green Bay Packers, especially me, since mine was a little bit lesser. And we can kind of talk about some of the other things in the NFL, because once again, just when you think you know what's going on in the league, you realize you don't really know anything. So there's some other things we can talk about. But to start off, let's bring Matt in here, and I know the Redskins seem to be a little bit in disarray, but this is as impressive as the Packers have been, in my eyes, since probably 2011. Even with that Houston game last year, they just didn't completely obliterate an opponent and make it, it looked like they were Wisconsin playing against UMass yesterday at a lot of the times. And I was, not that I ever thought they were a bad team, but they looked a lot better than I expected to see them at any point this year.
Yeah, and they were so well-rounded, too, and I guess I'm not super surprised by the offense, but the way the defense played in that first half was incredible. Mm-hmm. And Washington is supposed to be one of these contenders in the NFC who a lot of people think is going to win their division, and they, like you said, they made them look like an FCS team on Sunday. So it was really awesome to see. Like you said, they've blown people out before, and even compared to teams that they beat that are bad, like beating some of those bad Lions teams, this might be as impressive as we've seen, like you said, in a couple of years. So it was definitely great to see.
Yeah, and 24-0 halftime lead, and they were a fingertip of James Jones away from a 31-0 halftime lead. Just incredible performance. Aaron Rodgers tying Matt Flynn's franchise record for single game passing yards. He's now tied both of Flynn's marks, so Flynn is still existing in the Packer record book for that great game in 2011. You had the wide receivers look absolutely spectacular. James Starks rushing for 132 yards. The defense having a couple of turnovers there. I guess the most impressive part, I think, you mentioned the defense, but let's just start with the offense. Aaron Rodgers, we always expect him to look great, but one of the concerns I had this offseason was that they're entrusting this offense to a lot of somewhat unproven guys. You've had James Jones, Randall Cobb, Jermichael Finley, Jordy Nelson, all have had very, very bright spots, but it hasn't existed for a long period of time. But man, you're afraid to say anything just because of how the other, three of those four have been quite injured. James Jones has been up and down throughout his career, but you hate to say trim the fat when you're talking about guys like Greg Jennings and Donald Driver, but this is as cohesive as I can remember this receiving core looking in a long time.
It was just so effortless. Aaron Rodgers' 480, it just looked so easy to come by. It's not like he was struggling at all. Everybody was open, and if they weren't, he was throwing them open, or the receivers were, making plays on balls. So it was, I don't know. These are the four guys that we're stuck with here, and it doesn't look like a bad thing at this point. James Jones looked like one of the best receivers in the league. Mm-hmm. He got targeted 12 times, which is incredible. Yeah. And Randall Cobb looks basically unstoppable, and he did last year too, but he's staying healthy and continuing it this year now. And I don't know how you stop all four of these guys. I think it's about as good of a four receiver tandem as there is in the league right now.
Yeah, and pick your poison, because James Jones seems to be able to find the open spots. Jordy Nelson is a matchup nightmare. Jermichael Finley, he's that times 10. He just is bowling over people like he's, pick Mike Ditka or pick your great tight end. He's just destroying people. And Randall Cobb's burst almost looks like Marvin Harrison or Jerry Rice, just how fast he gets moving once he has the ball. And they can do everything with these guys, and Rodgers is rarely missing it. You almost run out of ways to describe how good these guys are, but I don't know. I feel silly for almost doubting them a little bit, but they've played great both weeks. Arguably, this offense they had some kind of ups and downs last week, but gosh, this is one of the better starts to the season I've seen, even including 2011 from an offensive standpoint, because they kind of struggled that second week in 2011. So just I'm almost speechless. I did not expect this offense to be that good that fast.
And there's really nothing you can say other than they were just great. And I think part of the reason why they look so good is because they had the other parts moving. Mm-hmm. The offensive line started really shaky, but then picked it up after that. So that's obviously a huge part of this offense. And then in their run blocking, they were fantastic. I mean, obviously James Stark's getting going for over 100 yards for the first time for the Packers in a long time. That's going to make Rodgers' job a lot easier. But like you said with the pick your poison thing, I mean, we've got one of each kind of receivers. I mean, you got a possession guy, you got a speed guy, you got a deep threat guy, and you got a freak of a tight end for a mismatch there. So, it's if they have every part going and the offensive line plays well, this offense is going to be pretty much unstoppable. Mm-hmm. And I know they weren't quite clicking that well last week, but they were going against a pretty darn good San Francisco defense and still looked pretty good. So, I think we're in for some big numbers this year again, and maybe Rodgers can top his big totals from a couple of years ago, maybe.
Yeah, you wonder. He's got, 7 touchdowns in 2 games? So, obviously you don't want to parlay that out for the whole season. What is that, 56 touchdowns? I don't know if he'll get to that. But one of the things, and I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast, but I was this offseason trying to analyze why exactly the 2012 offense just didn't seem like the Packers offense of the previous 3 years. From a yardage standpoint, from a point standpoint, they were still really high in the league. They scored 27 points a game. They're like 5th in yards, or maybe they were a little lower than that in yards, honestly. But they still, for all intents and purposes, was still a really good offense. And it just didn't feel like they were the Packers last year, and I really couldn't figure out why in the numbers. So I finally was able to break it down. And if I shared these numbers earlier in the offseason, I apologize, but it kind of works into what we've seen so far in 2013. The big difference between last year's offense and the offenses of 2009, 10, and 11 was their lack of explosive plays, where in 2009, 10, and 11, they had 32, 35, and 37 plays of over 30 yards. In 2012, they only had 23, so that was a big, huge drop. That sounded very scientific. A very big, huge drop, but it was quite a significant reduction, almost a third. And this year, they already have 8 plays over 30 yards in 2 games. I mean, that would put them on pace to shatter the 37 that they got in 2011 when they were just completely unstoppable. So that ought to give you some perspective, as the thing that maybe held them back last year and made them inconsistent at times and vulnerable was the fact that they couldn't have those explosive plays. They only had 23 all of last year in 16 games. They have 8 and 2. So I think at least as long as everybody can stay healthy, sure, there's going to be adjustments, and they're probably not going to get 4 a week for the rest of the season, which they have exactly 4 against San Francisco, 4 against Washington. But that is an encouraging sign that this offense, we talked all last year that it seemed like defenses had figured out what Rodgers and McCarthy were trying to do. The first 2 games of this season says, hey, we've moved our chess pieces, and now we got you on the run again.
Yeah, and it might have something to do with the health of some of the receivers last year. Maybe they just weren't, as good at deep threats as they normally are because they were a little banged up and what have you. But I just remember thinking all last year, it just seemed like teams were playing just cover 2 and some deep safety zones on us, and we just couldn't take the top off it at all. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden this year that's changed. So I guess I don't know enough, and the sample size is so small that I don't know if we've, adjusted to that, if the receivers are just playing better, or if for some reason teams have stopped playing that strategy against us. I don't know if you've really noticed anything, but I mean, it's been one-on-one guys down the sidelines more consistently, and Rodgers is hitting every single one. So it seemed like there was a strategy that was working against us last year. So I don't know if we've kind of changed things up, or we're just kind of getting some nice matches.
Yeah, and it's a very small sample size, as you mentioned, but just like they had at least, 1 or 2? They had some deep routes down the sidelines on pump fakes yesterday, and I think they had that one to Nelson. They had some others against San Francisco, and I felt like we didn't see that hardly at all last year.
Yeah.
And everything just felt like it was such an effort to get down the field all last season. I mean, we talked a ton in the early season podcast last year of them trying to do that boot and then the throw the deep post to Jordy, and everybody in the stadium and everybody on the defense knew exactly where that ball was going when Aaron Rodgers took 2 steps from under center. And this year...